My name is Isabel Monroe. I'm 36 years old and used to be the creative director at a prestigious interior design firm in Seattle. After a year of depression treatment and stepping away from everything, I'd just given my first public talk to mark my return. I'd hoped Nathan, my husband, the man who once promised to always stand by me, would be proud. That he'd pull me into his arms like he used to. But when I stepped into my own house, before I even took off my coat, I saw him kneeling, proposing to Sophie, the woman who used to be my trusted assistant, the woman I once took in. They had no idea I was standing there, and when Nathan said to her, "From now on, no one will ever hurt you again," I knew the one he wanted to erase was me. Have you ever come home and realized you're no longer part of your own life? Comment if you've ever felt so betrayed that words couldn't even form. Hit like and subscribe if you want to hear what happened next. When I showed them I hadn't disappeared, I had only just begun. People used to call Nathan and me the golden couple of Seattle. Two successful people, two aligned hearts, two souls building an empire that was both stylish and influential. We ran high-end interior design projects together, appeared at community art fundraisers, smiled on magazine covers like nothing could shake us. And honestly, for a while, I believed that too. Nathan was the kind of man who drew admiration the moment he entered a room. Composed, articulate, with just the right amount of tenderness when needed. In the early days, he would show up at my studio just to take me out to lunch, sometimes carrying a sketch I had scribbled in my notebook and asking the design team to turn it into a 3D model. Because anything you touch deserves to be finished, he once told me. I thought I had found someone who saw the value inside me. But then 3 years ago, things began to crack. I was 14 weeks pregnant when I lost the baby. A sudden pain in the middle of the night, blood soaking through the crisp white bed sheets I'd picked out so carefully. We rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. I'll never forget the doctor's expression as he placed a hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, because nothing needed to be said. From that day on, it was like I vanished from my own life. I stepped back from work, handed over the company to the vice director, and told the press I needed time to heal and restore my energy. I stopped sketching, stopped going to the studio, and more than anything, I stopped believing in the idea of joy. Nathan stayed calm through it all. He didn't cry, didn't blame anyone, didn't hold me longer than usual. He simply said, "We need time." Then quietly took over the financial management, helped me clear out my bookshelf, and removed the baby room paintings I had once made. I thought he was protecting me from pain. But looking back, I realize it was when he began removing me from his life, piece by piece. And then Sophie showed up. One rainy autumn afternoon, I met her in the hallway of a law firm, a young woman with messy curls holding a divorce file, eyes puffy from crying but still forcing a polite smile. I was waiting for Nathan to finish a meeting with a client and struck up a conversation. She said she was running from an abusive marriage, that her ex-husband was powerful and wealthy and she had nowhere to turn. For some reason, I saw a younger version of myself in her eyes. I let Sophie stay at our place temporarily, hired a lawyer to help her, and later offered her the job of being my personal assistant. Once I started easing back into work, she thanked me profusely, tears streaming down her face. "I'll never forget what you did for me," she said. In the beginning, Sophie was diligent, quiet, and always asked before doing anything. She organized my schedule, prepped meeting notes, filtered emails, and always brewed the exact tea I liked. I once thought, if I couldn't have a daughter, at least I had a little sister I chose myself. But over time, something started to feel off. Like how she'd linger at the house after hours, first to tidy the living room, then to double-check Nathan's paperwork, and eventually she was preparing breakfast for both of us. Nathan would say, "If she's offering to help, let her. You need rest." A faint nod, though something inside me felt off. One time I was folding towels and overheard Sophie in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice was hushed, but I heard every word. "Don't worry, she doesn't suspect a thing. Trust me, she won't catch on anytime soon." I stood frozen behind the partition wall, heart pounding. Then Sophie walked out, beaming. "I was just checking in on my mom. She's got a little cold," and I wondered, when did I start doubting everything? Nathan had been working late a lot, coming home even later. whispering with Sophie in the kitchen, laughing louder than he ever did with me. One night I joked, if I didn't know better, I'd think I was watching a sitcom. Nathan shrugged. You're being too sensitive. I started to feel like a guest in my own home. I tried to push the feeling away, reminding myself not to doubt the man who had stood beside me through the brightest years. But then one day, I opened my laptop to find an old sketch and discovered I was locked out of my company email. Sophie had reorganized the system, that was her explanation. Another time, when I asked to review our bank accounts after noticing some large transactions, Nathan gently replied, I moved some funds into a long-term investment account. Don't worry, I've got it covered. My lips curved, an automatic robotic motion, then turned away and started remembering everything. I didn't know exactly when it started between them, but I knew this. They were so sure I'd never see it coming, that I was too fragile to suspect, that I had disappeared. They were wrong. I don't remember the exact moment my suspicion turned into certainty. Maybe it was the first time our shared credit card got declined during a routine morning coffee. The barista looked at me sympathetically and I chuckled. Probably a system error. But when I checked the banking app, every account under my name, both personal and joint, had vanished from the dashboard. No error, no alert, just gone. I called the bank. The representative politely explained that, due to updated access permissions, I should speak to my husband, the primary financial coordinator. When I said I was a co-owner, she apologized. According to the current system, you no longer have access rights. I hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Nathan came home late that day as usual. I asked casually, pretending it was a minor curiosity. I couldn't log into the accounts. Something wrong? He looked at me. No raised brow, no surprise. We temporarily locked them to deal with some tax issues, the long-term investments need to be shifted early to avoid double taxation. Nothing to worry about. I forced a smile. Okay, just let me know next time. I will, he said, kissing my forehead, as if nothing had happened. But I understood. And I began tracing everything back. I opened the filing drawer in the home office where I used to store documents for property purchases, investment agreements, life insurance, and older design licensing contracts. What I found were updated versions, all bearing Nathan's name. Mine was either gone or listed only as referenced party or dependent. I remember perfectly the purchase agreement for the penthouse in downtown Seattle. On the day we signed, I was the one who transferred the deposit from my personal account. But now the sole registered owner is Nathan Carter. I also remember when we renewed our insurance certificate, Nathan handed me a stack of pre-printed papers and said, "This is just to consolidate the insurance documents. Just sign quickly." I signed, didn't read it carefully, because I was still in shock after a health screening revealed an early risk of breast cancer. Then came the email. I opened my old work inbox, the one I used to receive private design contracts from former clients. But every folder had been deleted. Access logs showed someone had changed the password, reset the recovery address, and installed filters to automatically forward all emails to an alternate address, one I'd never seen before. I checked the recovery info. The verification phone number belonged to Sophie. I sat there for hours. It felt like witnessing a silent murder, and I was the victim. I called the law firm where Nathan worked, pretending I wanted to book an appointment with a partner to consult on asset authorization. The assistant cheerfully asked, "Miss Monroe, right? Nathan mentioned he'd be sending the temporary medical guardianship paperwork to you this week. Would you like help filling it out?" Medical guardianship. Yes, per the court request. Since you have a history of mental health treatment, the court wants to ensure a family member is legally authorized to assist should any signs of instability appear. It felt like someone poured ice water down my spine. I hung up. I don't even remember what I said after that. I stood in the living room, the one I had decorated with my own hands, where I had chosen each beam of sunlight for the afternoon light, where Nathan and I had spent hours designing the arched glass ceiling together. And now I was another piece of furniture removed from the asset list. A week later, Nathan emailed me with the subject line, "Proposal for long-term legal protection." In the email, he gently explained that he had consulted with an attorney to ensure you wouldn't be stressed by financial responsibilities and that, if you agree to sign, I'll handle all management. Focus on your emotional recovery. I had no doubts left. No more thinking maybe I'm being too sensitive. No more excusing excessive concern. I wasn't crazy, I had been conditioned to believe I was crazy. And they had nearly succeeded. But what Nathan didn't know was that I had already started recording every phone call, every word he said, every suggestive phrase. He thought I was fading, but I was quietly capturing the entire performance. From the inside. I didn't think life could get worse than that. Until a Friday afternoon when I ran into Rachel, my best friend from college. We had once been inseparable. Studying design together, building careers together, witnessing each other grow. But after I got married, the distance between me and my old friends grew, not because they changed, but because I had pulled back too long under the illusion of stability. Seeing Rachel again, I couldn't hide my emotion. She hugged me tightly in a little bookstore in our old neighborhood like nothing had ever come between us. "Oh my God, Isabel, you still look amazing." I smiled faintly. If amazing means someone whose husband just took everything and is now trying to declare her legally incompetent, then sure. Rachel froze. "What? Nathan?" I nodded, the smile sharp and bitter. "And Sophie too, remember the brunette assistant I told you about? She's pregnant now, with Nathan's child." Rachel stared for a few seconds. Then she pulled me across the street to a cafe, placing her hand gently over mine. "I need you to stay calm and hear this." Rachel opened her phone and pulled up an article. Criminal attorney Nathan Carter and his fiancée spotted at the American Children's Foundation Gala, a fresh start after family tragedy. I stared at the headline, unable to believe my eyes. In the photo was Nathan, his hand resting on Sophie's clearly pregnant belly, easily 4 months along. She wore a white satin dress, leaning against him like they were already a real family. And me, I was just an edited memory. Rachel exhaled. "I don't know what game they're playing, but they've been showing up at nearly every event lately." Sophie introduces herself as Nathan's fiancée. "You're mentioned as a woman with a history of psychological instability who is now receiving the proper care and love she needs." I went stiff. "What did you say?" "Nathan's been telling people you refused treatment, that you lost control, ruined contracts, fought with investors, that he had to step up to support Sophie. A strong woman carrying his child." Rachel's words were sharp and deliberate. I tilted my head back and closed my eyes. It felt like thousands of shards of glass scraping through my brain. Each shard a past conversation, a glance Sophie once gave me, a whisper from Nathan I once believed was love. I opened my phone and went on social media. News of Nathan and Sophie flooded law blogs and local business magazines. They were painted as a symbol of recovery after loss. A couple who had overcome the shadows of their past. And me? I was the shadow they rewrote their story around. On a blog for female entrepreneurs, I read one line that made my blood run cold. "Perhaps it's time for former industry leaders like Isabel Monroe to learn how to exit gracefully." Exit gracefully? I wanted to scream. I didn't exit. I was erased. Stripped of my rights, robbed of the truth, recast in someone else's script. Rachel sat still, holding my hand. "Are you going to fight back?" I let out a dry laugh. "Fight how? When they're using my history of depression as a weapon?" "You're not the only one who's ever broken, Isa." Rachel squeezed my hand. "But you're the only one sharp enough not to lose yourself completely. Do you know anyone who's worked with the press, or someone who could help me recover deleted data from an old account?" Rachel looked at me, like she saw the light returning to eyes that had been dim for far too long. "I know a few people," she said. "And, Isabel," I turned to her, "you don't need to become the famous CEO again. But if you want to flip this whole game, they're not going to be ready for it. And I'll be right here beside you." 3 days after meeting Rachel, I sat in a small cafe near Capitol Hill, waiting for the only person I felt I could trust at that moment, Thomas Green. Thomas had been a classmate of mine at Yale. Back then, he was known for having one of the sharpest legal minds, once silencing a tenured law professor with a single cold rebuttal. We were never particularly close, but I always knew. If anyone understood the law well enough to save me from a sophisticated legal trap, it was Thomas. He arrived right on time, still in his buttoned-up shirt, black-rimmed glasses, with that ever-analytical expression. But when his eyes met mine, there was something softer than I remembered. "Isa," he said, skipping any small talk, "Rachel told me what's going on. I've already reviewed some of the information." I pulled a printed file from my handbag, proof that my bank accounts had been reassigned, property ownership documents altered, though they bore traces of my name, and, most importantly, the draft of the legal guardianship petition Nathan was preparing to submit. Thomas flipped through each page. He didn't say much, just nodded occasionally or furrowed his brow. Finally he looked up. "You're being manipulated, and if you don't act, in less than 60 days you'll be legally and financially erased." I tried to stay calm. "Meaning I'll have nothing?" "Not on paper. And if you sign that medical guardianship form, even a preliminary version, Nathan will have the authority to make every financial decision on your behalf." I nodded slowly. "I won't sign, but I need evidence. I need to flip this game." Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "All right, but, Isa, you need to be ready to fight. Not to win, but to avoid being erased completely. I've already disappeared once, Thomas. I won't let it happen again." From that day forward, I moved through my life like a stranger, observing, recording, tracking. I returned to the old house once, under the pretense of picking up a few personal items before transferring the property. Sophie wasn't home. Nathan was entertaining guests. I knew the code to the safe in the home office. It hadn't changed since our first year of marriage. Inside were the usual folders, investment portfolios, banking documents, retirement account summaries. But something caught my eye. A new compartment, tucked deeper underneath. I pulled it out, and my chest tightened. Inside was Sophie's personnel file. The file I had once asked Nathan to vet carefully before hiring her as my personal assistant. I flipped through each page. Criminal record clearance in Washington State, employment history, preliminary pay records. Everything was flawless. Too flawless. I traced the old address listed somewhere in Texas. That night I went home and reached out to a former colleague in the design industry who had lived in Austin. A woman named Elena, who once worked on event planning and had hired Sophie for a support role. Elena remembered clearly. "Sophie Blake?" She frowned. "Falsified a reference letter to get into a non-profit organization. Got caught after 2 months." "Are you sure?" I asked. "As sure as I had to write the internal investigation report myself." She vanished afterward. No one pressed charges. The organization didn't want a scandal. I asked Elena to send a copy of the report if she still had it. She did within 30 minutes. The attachment read clearly, Blake Sophia L., suspected of forged letters of reference. No legal proceedings due to internal resolution. If Nathan had done a proper background check, he would have known. And knowing Nathan's meticulous nature, he had to have known. So why did he still hire her? I stared at the laptop screen, a wave of cold clarity rising in my chest. Sophie wasn't just a pampered other woman. She was a pawn, carefully raised to replace me. This wasn't some messy affair. Nathan and Sophie were a partnership. Men hungry for control and someone desperate for a chance. They needed me to be weak. They needed me gone. St. Elwood's Church was usually quiet on Saturday afternoons, except during special events. That day was one of them, a community day celebration sponsored by Nathan and Sophie. They handed out scholarships to underprivileged students, gifted new bicycles to kids, and stood before cameras as if they embodied love, compassion, and restoration. I arrived just in time. Dressed simply in a dark blue dress, a hint of lipstick, eyes soft but smile genuine. From a distance, I saw Nathan and Sophie near the wooden podium by the stage, hand in hand, smiling at the pastor and the elderly guests, thanking them profusely for their incredible commitment to the community. I walked up quietly and told the pastor I needed to speak privately with Nathan and Sophie backstage. "It's a family matter," I said gently. He nodded and signaled a staff member to open the door behind the altar. Nathan looked surprised. Sophie frowned, lips tight. "What are you doing here?" Nathan asked, voice low but steady. I sat on the wooden bench near the window, hands resting on my handbag. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I want to end this properly." Sophie crossed her arms, smirking. "You want to end things? By showing up in public like this?" "No," I replied, locking eyes with her. "By giving you something you might actually deserve." I opened my bag and pulled out a small ivory box with a silver ribbon. "A wedding gift," I said, placing it on the table between us. "It's not much, but at least it's honest." Nathan hesitated. Sophie curled her lip. "Honest?" she repeated, "from the woman who faked a miscarriage to keep her husband." Sophie kept going as if relishing the moment of control. "You know, I used to pity you. The way you shook and cried in the bathroom, clutching your stomach. I really did feel sorry. But then I realized you couldn't let go because you couldn't stand the idea that Nathan loved someone else." Her eyes lit up when she saw I didn't react. "You thought you were smart, Isabel, but you slept for months without even knowing your meds had been switched. You handed me that bottle yourself, remember? Sophie, can you help refill my prescription? I'm too tired. I changed the label, that's it. And you slept through the whole spring." I turned to Nathan. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, silent. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. Nathan swallowed hard. I didn't agree with it, but when things calmed down, it was more convenient," I finished. I rose, smoothing out my dress. "Thank you both for your honesty. I think I've heard enough." I walked out of the room, leaving the little box on the table. No one knew that inside it, nestled beneath velvet lining, was a camera no larger than a fingernail, the kind used in smart jewelry boxes. It had recorded over 20 minutes of confession from two people who had betrayed me. In the car ride home, I plugged the memory card into my laptop. The footage was crystal clear. Sophie's cold gaze, Nathan's silence, and every single cutting word, unedited. I replayed a section. I switched her medication. She never noticed a thing. Honestly, if she signs the medical guardianship papers, it makes everything legit. I closed my eyes, leaning back into the seat, a sting rising in my nose. Not from pain anymore, but because I had finally heard what I'd felt for over a year, what no one had believed. I didn't expect the invitation to speak at the Women Shaping the Next Generation Gala to come right then. The organizers said they wanted me to share my journey of overcoming adversity, recovering from depression, and returning to design as an inspiring story. They brought up the years when I was one of the most prominent figures in West Coast luxury interiors, once called the light artist by American Modern Home for my use of natural sunlight to shape space. I accepted without hesitation, because I knew Nathan and Sophie were among the event's top sponsors, and because I was ready. That day I wore an ivory dress, simple, elegant, understated. Hair in a bun, nude lips, not radiant but composed. Before leaving the house, I double-checked my device, a tiny USB loaded with the edited video, half my healing story, half the truth they tried to bury. I arrived at the venue an hour early and handed the clip to the AV technician, someone I had already approached 2 days before, posing as a cautious speaker who wanted everything to run smoothly. He nodded and said politely, "We'll play the clip at your cue during the presentation." The ballroom was tastefully arranged, warm golden lights glowing on each table decorated with flowers under the theme, Lift and Restore. Nathan and Sophie sat at table number 3 near the stage. They didn't spot me right away, but I saw them clearly. Sophie was visibly pregnant. Her hand rested on Nathan's shoulder as he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh. I took my seat, nodding at a few familiar faces in the industry. Everyone smiled politely, though I knew many still thought of me as the woman who lost it after the divorce, as one article had said. At 8 p.m., the lights dimmed. The MC introduced me with respectful words. One of the first to bring therapeutic intention into spatial design. A woman who has worked with hospitals, schools, even elder care facilities. Bringing light into places forgotten. I stepped onto the stage, Applause echoed. I stood tall, hands resting on the podium, looking out at the audience. And directly at table number 3. "My name is Isabel Monroe," I began. "And perhaps some of you have heard a different version of me. A woman who suffered from depression, who stepped away from her career after losing direction, who disappeared." I paused. A few chairs shuffled. "But tonight, I want to share something else. Not how broken I once was, but how true strength begins the moment you stop letting others define you." I gave a subtle signal to the tech booth. The screen behind me lit up, the first image, my old apartment, sunlight flooding the kitchen, the painting I had made during the first season living with Nathan, home videos I'd taken on my phone, tiny honest moments, reading by the window, brewing tea, crying alone after my first miscarriage. My voice narrated over the footage. I thought this was a safe place, but sometimes silence hides the most violent sounds. Then came the turning point. The screen went dark for a second, then flickered on. Grainy footage of the church's backstage room. Lighting dim, but the audio unmistakably clear. Sophie's voice, sharp and smug. She never noticed a thing. I switched her meds every week. She slept through spring like a wind-up doll that ran out of battery. Nathan whispered, "I didn't think it would be this easy, but maybe you know her better than she knows herself." Sophie laughed. "She thought she was the center of everything. Nobody even remembers her anymore." A murmur rippled through the room. Chairs creaked. People turned to one another. Nathan shot to his feet. "Turn it off," he shouted, rushing toward the AV booth. "Shut it down now." But it was too late. The MC tried to intervene, but Nathan had already reached the stage. I turned to face him. "For the first time since everything, you know this is a setup," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You had no right." "I have every right," I cut in, voice calm. "And more than that, I have the truth." Sophie pushed back her chair and rose, 1 step, 2, then she stumbled. Someone shouted, "She's fainting!" People rushed in, chaos broke out. Medical staff arrived swiftly and carried Sophie out. I stayed on stage, my hand gripping the wooden podium. The screen remained lit. The final slide I had embedded appeared. White text on black. "Emotional abuse is real, and those who control often act behind closed doors. But once the light is turned on, it never fades." I took a deep breath, then bowed my head. No applause. Only a heavy silence, like the surface of a lake just struck by a stone, not yet rippling. And in that silence I knew. The storm had arrived. But this time, it wouldn't swallow me whole. It would drown the ones who created it. 1 week after the gala, every morning headline in Seattle read the same. Attorney Nathan Carter and girlfriend exposed for psychological manipulation, alleged financial misconduct. Video goes viral. I didn't share the video with any news outlet. But as if by some unspoken law, the things that need to be seen find their way into the public eye. That morning, I stepped out of my usual coffee shop on Pine Street and caught the gaze of a middle-aged woman. She approached quietly and gently, took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying what so many of us have kept inside. We're still here, but we've been silent for far too long." I squeezed her hand, speechless. My throat tightened, because I understood every word. Sophie was fired from the charity within the same week the scandal broke. The board of directors held an emergency meeting after receiving a petition signed by over 2,000 people, most of them women who had followed the reintegration program she had overseen. But what shocked me more was that Sophie lost custody of her own daughter, an 8-year-old girl who now lived with her biological father in Portland. I didn't feel joy. On the contrary, I felt bitter. That child wasn't to blame, but life sometimes chooses to expose consequences in the harshest way possible. I heard the girl now lives with her aunt in a more stable and loving home. As for Nathan, things unraveled faster than I imagined. Less than 3 weeks after the gala, the Washington State Bar Association announced the indefinite suspension of his law license, citing professional misconduct, deliberate manipulation, and financial fraud against a legal dependent. The investigation into Nathan's finances revealed a hidden network of accounts under shell corporations, draining shared assets before property division. But thanks to the statements I had quietly backed up in advance, most of the funds were frozen in time and ordered to be returned. I didn't press criminal charges, not because I forgave them, but because I didn't want the next chapter of my life drowned in courtrooms, testimonies, and dark memories. I returned to design work 6 months later, but this time, I didn't take on high-end real estate projects or work with investors obsessed with cold luxury mansions. I accepted only restoration projects for reintegration centers, shelters for abused women, and community mental health clinics. Some were abandoned gas stations, old warehouses, or even dim, moldy basements, but I transformed them into spaces filled with light, greenery, and quiet. One day, while redesigning the kitchen at a care home for abandoned children, a little boy, no older than 8, looked around and asked, "Miss, why is this place so pretty? Did you paint sunlight on the walls?" "No, sweetheart, I just took away some of the darkness." I started my own foundation and called it the Monroe Reset. Not to stamp my name on something, but to remind people that we all deserve a restart, a rebirth, no permission required. The foundation provides legal aid for women suffering emotional abuse, offers shelter, connects them with therapists, and, most importantly, creates space where those who were once controlled can design their lives on their own terms. No one has to become someone else to be accepted. No one has to shape their trauma into a story that flatters the media. In that space, they just need to be themselves and begin again from wherever they were left behind. One afternoon, as I stepped out of the foundation office, Rachel waited for me at the door. "You know," she said, handing me a bundle of thank you letters from small organizations across other states, "people are starting to call you the woman who rebuilds the spine of the broken." I laughed. "Sounds like an orthopedic surgeon." "But for the parts no one can see," Rachel replied, her voice steady. "The parts someone once pushed down so far, they were afraid to stand upright again." The small coastal town of Seabrook, nestled along Highway 101, carries the scent of sea salt across the grass and winding alleys like scattered memories. I moved there at the start of spring, bringing only 3 boxes of books, an old easel, and a porcelain tea set no one else had ever used but me. The owner of the olive green cottage I rented was a widowed woman named Merrill. She didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a knowing wink when she saw my name on the lease. "Monroe, huh? Is it?" A gentle expression crossed my face. "It is, but I left all the noise behind." On my first day settling in while placing lavender pots on the porch, a curly-haired girl around 7 rode by on her bike, then screeched to a halt. "Are you the new lady?" "Not exactly new. I lived here when I was little. What about you?" "I'm Emily Hayes. My house is down the block. My dad's name is Michael." She grinned wide. I recognized her last name instantly. Michael Hayes. When I was young, I spent a few summers in Seabrook with my grandmother. Michael had been the boy who folded paper boats in the backyard. I never thought I'd see him again, much less like this. That afternoon, as I was arranging books on a shelf, there was a knock at the door. Michael was waiting at the door, his hair streaked with silver, sleeves rolled up, holding a basket of toast and a jar of homemade honey. "Welcome back to Seabrook," he said. "Emily told me you used to know me when we were kids. You taught me how to fold paper boats. I sank 3 of them in my grandma's pond." We laughed. The kind of laughter that wasn't forced, wasn't polite, and wasn't meant to impress. We didn't become anything right away. It was morning coffee chats, walks with Emily along the beach, nods exchanged at the weekend farmer's market. But something felt different. Not excitement, but peace. One night, during a heavy rainstorm, the power went out. I went over to Michael's house to borrow a flashlight. He handed one to me and asked, "Are you afraid of the dark?" I shook my head. "I used to be, no. I'm only afraid of being lied to in the light." Michael didn't ask more. He poured ginger tea, let me sit in the rocker by the window and listen to the rain. No judgment, no pity. And that was what made me start to trust again. That night, as I was sketching blueprints for a project to restore a senior care home near town, my phone rang. An unknown number lit up the screen. I wasn't going to answer, but something made me swipe. The voice that came through was rough, lower than I remembered. "Isabel, I knew who it was. I said nothing. The voice cracked, like gravel under rain. I don't even know if I have the right to call you, but I need to say this. I stayed quiet, my hand tightening around the edge of the blanket. I've lost everything, he sighed. The job, the reputation, the friends. Sophie left me, or rather disappeared when she realized I had nothing left to offer. I'm renting an apartment in Tacoma, working at a tiny law firm, making 1/8 of what I used to. No one wants to hire someone suspended for ethical misconduct. He paused, then spoke slowly, like swallowing broken glass. You won, Isabel. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. On the damp ground, drops of water clung to the lavender petals, glistening under the porch light. I ended the call. I didn't need to win, I needed peace. And now, I had it, not something handed to me. Something I rebuilt. With my own 2 hands, my heart, and every scar. The exhibit took place on an early autumn day, when Seabrook was blanketed in a thin mist over rooftops and sand, like someone had exhaled softly into the morning. I titled the event The Quiet Return. No fanfare, no press coverage, just a bright room, framed paintings on the walls, and the slow footsteps of people who once knew me. Or thought they did. The gallery was housed in a renovated old warehouse near the harbor. I chose it because it had once been abandoned, damp, and deemed worthless. Much like how people used to look at me when all that was left of me felt like ash. In the center of the room, I hung the largest painting. The background was a cold, misty white, layered with delicate thread-like lines intersecting one another. No clear shape, no easy meaning, but if you looked long enough, you'd see a figure standing upright inside the swirl, with a faint light emerging from the chest. Beneath the painting, I placed a small brass plaque engraved with the words, "They took everything, except the part of me that refused to disappear." It was a sentence I had once scribbled on the back of a pillbox the night Nathan handed me the temporary guardianship papers and told me I should consider long-term rest. I never threw that box away. I kept it in a drawer for a year, to remind myself that even handwriting, something so small, could be the only thing left when everyone else had decided you were done. When it was my turn to speak, I brought no notes, no prepared remarks. I simply stood among the guests, hand resting gently on the wood of the podium, and looked around. Rachel nodded from her seat. Michael stood behind, next to Emily, who was fiddling with the ribbon tied to her arm, once worn by my mother in her final years. Someone asked me, why did you stay silent for so long before speaking up? And I think, it's because some wounds, if spoken too soon, only echo your own fracture loud enough to drown any chance of healing. I glanced at the large canvas in the middle of the room. I didn't survive because of revenge. I survived because I refused to let others define me as a victim. I've been called weak, unstable, the one left behind, but today I stand here whole. Not because they forgave me, but because I gathered myself back together. I paused. My hand trembled slightly, but I didn't hide it. Some see silence as weakness, but for me silence was where I started over. Not to retreat, but to prepare. Not to disappear, but to reemerge. At the right time, in the right way, as the person I truly am. And when someone asks me, what's your greatest achievement after all of this? I won't say reclaiming my reputation, or exposing anyone. I'll say, it's being able to eat breakfast in the sunlight, read a book without bracing myself, and look up when someone calls my name, without fearing they're calling for an old version of me. I stepped down from the podium, no roaring applause, just quiet gazes, a nod from a man at the end of the row, and Emily's small hand slipping into mine as I walked past. That night, back home, I opened my laptop to check a thank you note from the event organizers. The screen went dark for a second before lighting up. I opened the final slide of my collection. The line I had written months earlier appeared in white on black. Some betrayals ruin your life. Some remind you to rebuild it. And some teach you how to rise like no one's watching. I read it once more, then closed the laptop. Outside the window, the ocean was still breathing softly. Peace is not the reward for those who win. It is the gift for those who choose to pause at the right moment and dare to move forward with no one waiting. Have you ever been pushed into the dark by the very person you trusted most, then had to find your way back, not to retaliate but simply to live in truth? My story is not just a warning about betrayal. It's a journey to understand this. Silence is not weakness. Forgiveness is not forgetting. And healing never means returning to the place that broke you. If you've ever stood between staying quiet to keep the peace, or stepping into the light to protect yourself, I'd love to hear which path you chose. Share your thoughts in the comments. You never know, what you've been through might give someone else the strength to rise from their own wreckage. And if stories like this resonate with you, real slices of life about family, loss, and healing, don't forget to follow this channel. Each week, we'll bring you more deeply human, emotional, and most importantly, true stories.